It's pretty rare these days that I pick up a brand new video game as soon as it comes out, but the moment I saw Wavetale, this game just jumped out at me super hard. Like, everything about this game is so me. It's like everything I love about video games. And I was like, okay, I have to get this immediately. But I actually learned that Wavetale is not a new game. It actually came out a while ago on Google Stadia, but, I mean, that's Google Stadia. Does that really count? I would argue not really. So now that the game's come out on consoles and PC, now it's, like, actually out for real. And I picked it up and gave it a playthrough, and I think that Wavetale is a good game overall. Unfortunately, I was actually fairly disappointed by the game, due to various different things that we'll get into, but first I just want to talk about what the game is a little bit. Wavetale is an open-world 3D platformer, which is a little bit funny because I've been playing a couple of those games recently with Sonic Frontiers and Bowser's Fury, and to be honest, Wavetale is also kind of similar to those games in a certain way, especially Bowser's Fury, where, you know, it's on the water and you have all these different islands that you go to and you complete platforming challenges in order to collect things or complete missions that will then open up more of the map and allow you to explore new areas that you just rinse and repeat that until you finish the game. As far as your moveset goes, it's fairly standard for the most part. You got a jump, double jump, a dash, you can do a hover move. The thing that really makes Wavetale fun and stand out is that the speed from your dash gets preserved if you jump out of it, kind of similar to like the Donkey Kong Country Returns games and like Rayman Origins and Legends. Those are the kinds of games that this felt most similar to me, kind of like a 3D version of Rayman Origins and Legends, sort of, just in terms of the movement a little bit. And along with that ability to jump out of dashes to preserve the speed, you get an enhanced effect on that, specifically off of an air dash into a double jump. So using a dash jump into an air dash into a double jump, along with the hover as well, you can cover lots of distance really, really quickly, and it's really fun to do. The movement in this game is very, very nice feeling. And then along with that, you have all of the water-based movement as well, where you can dive into the water and then you'll swim underneath the surface of the water for a couple of seconds, zooming across really fast. And then you can also slide on top of the water with some good speed, and then from there you can do a charge jump out of the water to get a bunch of height, and you can again combine this with the air dash double jump for even greater speed and distance. It's all fairly simple stuff, but boy is it fun to do. You know, you can see how this game was probably immediately attractive to me, because you see this kind of movement and this kind of world with this kind of art style, and I am just so on board with everything that this game has going on immediately. Along with that stuff, you also have the ability to kind of grapple onto certain points, and this is kind of done like a little bit like with a soft lock-on, sort of half automatically, where as long as you're in range of a thing you can grapple onto and it's kind of sort of within the center of your camera, then you can just press the button and you'll automatically swing over to that thing and fly to it. And usually those are like ramps or cannons or whatever that will launch you high into the air, or something you can grab onto to look for more stuff to platform across. You know, fairly basic stuff. To be honest, that's not my favorite part of the game with the movement mechanics, because it's very just, like, simple and straightforward. You just, like, if you see that you can grapple onto something, you just hit the button and the game does it all for you, which is not nearly as cool, although I did learn later on in the game that you can jump out of the grappling animation to preserve that speed into a double jump, and then you can do lots of cool stuff with that. So, you know, fun movement stuff going on with this game. I'm a big fan of it. Just running around, jumping around, doing things in this game, it is great fun. There is also combat in Wavetale, although it's pretty bare bones and quite lacking. It's not really much of anything, honestly. You have just a basic attack that you can do, and a slower AoE attack to hit multiple enemies around you, as well as like a ground pound heavy attack you can do from the air. And that's pretty much it. You can use your dash to dodge enemy attacks, and there's only like 3 enemy types in the entire game. Yeah, combat is definitely not the strongest suit of Wavetale at all, and to be honest, it wasn't very long before I kind of just started ignoring enemies entirely and just running past them whenever I could. There are occasional instances in the game where it locks you into an area and makes you kill all the enemies, but most of the time you can just not engage with the combat, which I guess is kind of a positive thing because it's not that good. And fortunately, while not that great, it is very brief and pretty easy, so the times when it does lock you into combat, it doesn't last very long, so you can quickly get back to the actual fun movement stuff. Structurally, as I said, the game is kind of similar to other open-world platformers, which I guess is kind of becoming a bit of a subgenre these days. There's a couple of them that are cropping up that kind of have these kind of similar elements to them, where essentially the flow of the game is that you have a small area made up of a couple of different islands you can go to, and on each of these islands will be some sort of platforming sequence for you to complete, and at the end of it, you'll either get a collectible, or you'll complete a mission, or something like that. And then you'll leave that island and head to all the other ones and do all of their challenges until you complete all of them, and then that will complete the area, and then a new area will open up, and then you'll travel over to that area and do the challenges there, and you'll just do that over and over until you finish the game. Simple, straightforward structure, but it works. I got no problems with it. Aesthetically, I gotta say, I am loving Wavetale. This is like the exact kind of look and feel that I am all about in video games. Like this sort of very beautiful, yet also kind of desolate world. Like, the whole idea with this game is that this is like a world that's been flooded, and so the remaining people are living on the little bit of land that remains in these small islands. And so you get these, like, communities living on the ocean on these small islands. It has a very kind of, like, I don't know, Windfall Island from Wind Waker kind of vibe to it, but the whole world is like this, of all these small interconnected islands. It's a vibe that I very, very much can gel with, and the art style of the game is really nice looking, good cell shading. I really like the main character design. I think she looks super cool. The fact that, you know, everything is on the ocean, and so there's a big, like, sailing aesthetic. You know, you got the net, and you use that as your weapon and a tool for traversal. Like, the whole aesthetic of this game and what it's going for is super duper strong. Especially the stuff with you gliding on the ocean waves, and it's so good. The music of the game is also pretty good. Not like the most amazing stuff I've ever heard in my life, but decent. It gets the job done while you're playing through the story. It complements the game well. And the story itself is good. It's alright. It's serviceable. It's definitely nothing to write home about. It's nothing particularly unique. Very predictable for this type of game with this type of mood and atmosphere. If you've ever seen anything like this before, then you pretty much already know exactly what's going to happen within the first, like, hour of the game. It's very, very, like, been there, done that. But it's generally pretty well executed. It's alright, but it's certainly just kind of a pretty stock standard video game story that is not really gonna stick with you particularly, I don't think. You know, it's good, it's fine, it's got likable enough characters. It has a bit of heart to it and a couple of different themes that it's trying to get across, and it does it all well enough, but yeah, it was just kinda alright. It was enjoyable enough that I was invested in the story while playing through the game, but not much more than that. I guess to give a bit of a brief setup for anyone that's not familiar with this game is that the world of Wavetale takes place in a world that's been flooded, and people can't even swim in the ocean because apparently if you go more than a couple feet down, then there's something down there that you don't want to get involved with, and so people just live above the surface. But also, there are these dark clouds called gloom that surround the world, and if you go into those, then bad stuff happens to you as well, and so people have to live within the light of the lighthouses that can fend off the fog, but then suddenly the gloom starts to really roll in and starts to damage the lighthouses that keep it at bay, and so throughout the game, you are providing power to these lighthouses and repairing them so they can shine back once again and push away the gloom some more, and that's how you open up more areas of the game. The game is fairly character-focused, especially on the main character Sigrid and her grandmother character. They have quite a bit of history going on that you will discover as you play through the game. And, you know, it's fine, it's good, it's decent, it gets the job done. The big major thing that's kind of a big point of intrigue in the story is that early on, Sigrid encounters this shadow, and this shadow is what allows her to stand and walk on the ocean surface as well as glide across it, where she stands on the feet of the shadow, almost like it's kind of a mirror reflection of her in the water. And of course, there's quite a bit of intrigue and mystery as to what this shadow creature is and why it's helping her out, and of course, you'll figure that out as you play through the game. I don't want to get into, like, the super nitty-gritty details. Play the game for yourself if you want to see how the story goes. Like I said, it's good. It's okay. Nothing that's gonna knock your socks off, but enjoyable, and I like the setting and the ideas of what it's kicking around in terms of the world and what's happening here. It's all good stuff. That said, while I have been very positive up to this point, I did say that this game was overall a disappointment to me, and I do want to get into that. First of which is a relatively minor issue, is that the game is a little unpolished in certain aspects. A couple of bugs cropped up here and there throughout my playthrough, mainly having to do with sound stuff, like sound effects or music not playing when it's supposed to or things like that, as well as a couple of minor elements of jankiness or things. Nothing too major that really got in the way of the playthrough, just a little bit of roughness. You can definitely tell that this is a small indie game. It's not some really polished big 3D platformer like you see with major studios and stuff, which I went in expecting, and so I was fine with the little bit of rough edges here and there. That wasn't really much of a problem to me, but I felt like it was worth mentioning. But the actual problem I had with Wavetale, the thing that kind of let me down with this game and kind of ended up making it not as great as I was hoping it would be, comes down to a couple of things. Primarily, it's the lack of challenge in this game. And I'm not saying that I necessarily need the game to be difficult. You know, a lot of collectathon-style 3D platformers aren't very challenging. But the thing about Wavetale for me is that, like, you have this cool movement mechanics in the game with the double jump and the dashing and the hover and all that. You can fly around super fast and do all this stuff, but the game never really takes advantage of what you can do with really cool, fun, interesting level design, unfortunately. The platforming design in this game is all very, very rudimentary, I would say. It's all very straightforward and simple stuff, just static platforms that you just jump from one to the other, and that's basically the entire game. Occasionally there'll be points that you need to grapple to, but that's even less interesting as that's done automatically, and so it's kind of just like this semi-automatic, kind of passive, you just go forward, jump to the thing, grapple to the thing, you just do the thing that you have to do. Doesn't really require much precision, doesn't really require a lot of skill, a lot of speed, there's not really a lot of punishment for making mistakes. There's just not a whole lot here in terms of substance as far as the platforming goes. And that's not really what I was expecting going into Wavetale after watching the trailer. I thought that this was going to be like a really fun, fast-paced, cool movement platformer action game, but it's really not that at all. Wavetale is a very chill kind of game. It's one that you kind of just kick back, relax, and you maneuver around a 3D space and follow the story. That's really more of what it is. Which is not necessarily a bad thing, and I can like games like this from time to time. It's just not what I thought the game was going to be, and honestly, I find that it's kind of a waste to make Wavetale into that when you do have such fun movement mechanics that do offer player expressiveness and the opportunity for shortcuts and fun maneuvering and stuff. I would really like if there were some obstacles that actually required me to use this more advanced movement and required precision and required me to actually avoid things and really, you know, do some actual platforming that was skillful and interesting and fast-paced and cool. And the game just doesn't really have anything like that. The closest you get is a couple of race sequences that you can do, but even these are pretty easy and very straightforward and basic in terms of their design. The gameplay design of Wavetale overall is very, very simple, very, very casual in a way, I would say, where it's never really going to challenge the player very much at all. I didn't die a single time in the game. I can't even really think of many instances where I messed up and fell off of a platform. That happened like once, I think, in the whole game. And that to me is the major letdown. I really don't like when games design cool systems and gameplay mechanics and then they just do absolutely nothing with them. A lot of like casual and family-friendly and kid-friendly games do this, and to me it's just such strange design to even bother putting work into systems like this and then never actually incorporating it into the game design at all. Like, yeah, it's cool to have it there as an option so that way more advanced players can find out how to do skips and shortcuts and experiment around and see what they can do. but that never is as strong as a game that is purpose-built and designed with these advanced mechanics in mind, that actually encourages you to use them and requires you to use them in a way that actually creates for challenging gameplay where you use these mechanics not just because it's cool, but because you have to. This kind of like middle step in between like a casual relaxed game and a fast-paced action type game, I don't know, I don't really think that this works too well personally as someone that naturally leans more toward the action side of things, because I'm looking for interesting opportunities to do cool stuff with the movement, and they're there somewhat, but eventually that well starts to run dry because the level design just doesn't really encourage very much in terms of interesting movement, and so you kind of end up just doing the same thing over and over throughout the whole game. And that's kind of another problem I have with Wavetale, is that even within the way that the game is designed, it is very, very repetitive. Like, once you've completed the first area of the game, you've basically seen everything that the game has to offer. Like, it doesn't have different areas with different mechanics and gimmicks to them, different enemies, different types of platforms and maneuvers that you do. Everything is pretty much laid out very early on in the game, and then you just keep on doing it over and over. The game doesn't really get more challenging as you get further into it. The platforming never gets more interesting. The basic mechanics stay the same the whole time. It's a game that shows its hand very, very early, and then it doesn't have anything else beyond that. It's really just the story at that point that's pulling you forward, because after a while, the game starts to feel very samey. Which, in a game that had a stronger story, that would probably work better, but as I said, the story of Wavetale isn't amazing. So you kind of have this decent story that is pulling you along a decent-ish game that's very simple and very repetitive, and by the end of the game, it kind of just feels like they ran out of ideas in a way. Fortunately, the game isn't too long. It only took me 3 hours to beat it, which, you know, isn't really a great thing overall in general. It's fairly short for a platformer like this. But at the same time, with the repetitive nature of the game, it really couldn't last much longer than that because it was already starting to set in pretty heavily by the time I was near the end. So it's kind of a bit of a catch-22 there, where I wish the game was longer, but if it was longer, it wouldn't really be much better because the gameplay doesn't really have the legs to carry it that far. So the real problem is that the game just doesn't really have enough variety and interesting, fun gameplay to carry it that long. So it ends up being better that the game is shorter. It's kind of a weird place, and it's just a product of kind of the flaws of this game, in my opinion. Like I said, it's just a very basic game. There's just not really very much to it, unfortunately. You have the cool movement stuff, but the rest of the game is just not really there to support it, unfortunately. That said, I don't want to make it sound like Wavetale is a bad game, because it's certainly not. I never got bored playing Wavetale. I had a good time with it the whole time. It just wasn't a very good time. It wasn't a great time. I wasn't like, oh man, this game is so much fun. I was just kind of playing it somewhat passively a little bit, and having a decent amount of fun, but nothing more than that, really. It's okay. It's a relatively good time, I would say. Especially if you're someone that likes fun movement in games, then there's a lot of enjoyment just to be had moving around in this game. But eventually that does start to wear thin, and then it just kind of turns into a neat little game with some fun movement and an okay story that you kind of just go through the motions of, and you have a bit of enjoyment along the way. And that is why I was disappointed with Wavetale. Looking at this game and immediately getting a feel for the movement and the controls, I was expecting something really, really fantastic. And I just didn't get that, unfortunately. But it's a good game. It's a fine game. It's something that I think that someone can absolutely have a good time playing. I don't necessarily know if I would race to recommend the game. Like, I don't do review scores because that shit's stupid, but if I had to give it a score, I would say it hovers around like a 6 to 7 out of 10-ish kind of range. Which is certainly not bad by any means, but these days there are so many fantastic, incredible games out there that just playing one that's pretty okay is something that kind of feels like it could be not the best way to spend your time and money. At least that's how I feel about it. So at the end of the day, my overall thoughts on Wavetale are pretty neutral. There's definitely a lot of good in this game to enjoy, but there's also a lot of stuff about this game that's just not really particularly spectacular. And so I would say, as far as recommending the game goes, it's up to you. If what I've said and what I've shown has made the game look like a fun time, then I would say you're probably okay picking it up. You'll probably have a good time with the game. But if the negative things I've said about it has kind of turned you off from the game, then you're probably safe to pass on it, and you're not really missing out on anything that incredible. So there you go. That's my thoughts on Wavetale. A bit of a disappointing game, but certainly not a bad game. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time.